Yo, what's going on, everyone? This is Austin from Calling Our Shot, and today we're talking about my favorite starts and sits in fantasy football for week 1. Now, normally this video should be being posted on Tuesday, so be on the lookout for it next week. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to give him 4 players from each position. We're going to talk about QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defense. Kicker is a crapshoot. I'm not going to give you a starter sit for a kicker, but we're going to get 2 starts and 2 sits for each position. Let's hop into it. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We appreciate it. Almost at 8,000 subscribers. We can't do it without your love and support. Now, if you drafted guys like Christian McCaffrey or Travis Kelce, or Pat Mahomes, they're not going to be on this list. Come on, you're starting your studs and you're not looking back. Now, you're already going to start them. You don't need me to say, hey, you should start Travis Kelce this week. I think that's a good start. Now, we're going to be looking at the middle tier guys, giving you my favorite starts, maybe even some DFS plays, which I'll have another DFS video up later on this week. So, also, the positions will be timestamped down below if you want to go check them out. Maybe you want to skip to running backs immediately. Running backs will be stamped down below. We appreciate you guys. Now, my favorite QB start of the week, Jalen Hurts. Now, if you watch my fantasy football videos, you know I'm all in on the Jalen Hurts hype train. Maybe I'm shotgun. I'm riding shotgun in the wagon for Jalen Hurts. Now, despite not looking like the best QB in the NFL last season, he was very good in fantasy football. He only started, obviously, the last 4 games of the season. This week, he gets a date with the Atlanta Falcons. And man, I would be licking my chops, and we'll be licking our chops all week, all year against the Atlanta Falcons. I do think this defense will be pretty bad. They don't have a lot of talent. They obviously lost Keanu Neal to the Cowboys, and I think a full offseason for the Eagles to build around Jalen Hurts, to know he's the guy, get him some more offensive weapons as he was throwing to Greg Ward, who, no offense, not that great. So you got Devontae Smith, got some other weapons. Zach Ertz obviously still there. Dallas Goedert. I love it, and I think he comes out guns blazing against this and has a terrific fantasy week. Wouldn't be surprised to see him in my daily fantasy lineups, and I'll be posting those lineups on our Twitter at Calling Our Shot, as well as in the video. So make sure you're subscribed and you go follow us on Twitter. We're locking him in. Now moving on to my next start, Trevor Lawrence. Now currently the #1 pick. And we're throwing him right into my lineups, throwing him out to the Wolves. And why? Because he's playing the hapless Houston Texans. Now, Houston, they're not going to be very good this year, and they might very well end up with the worst record in the NFL. Now, Urban Meyer, you look at it, the new coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think him and Trevor Lawrence want to start off the year on the right note. And we saw how good he looked in the last final preseason game for Trevor Lawrence, that is. Now, Lawrence, he should have all 3 of his receivers. That is DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, and Marvin Jones. They should all be healthy and ready to go. And the Texans are just ready to go on a complete fire sale. Just say, hey, everyone, get out of here. They just traded Bradley Roby. Wouldn't be surprised to see Deshaun Watson finally out, David Johnson, all these guys. I'm in on Trevor Lawrence. I feel like it's a serious question to consider Trevor Lawrence, who obviously was drafted in, QB 12-13 range, or Justin Herbert, who has a bad matchup against the Washington football team. At least it's a conversation. Don't mind if, you're going to start your studs, Justin Herbert. Don't mind him over Trevor Lawrence. We got both of them. Wouldn't mind starting Trevor Lawrence in his first ever NFL start. Now moving on to some sits, Joe Burrow. Now he's coming off the ACL injury, and Joe Burrow last year, very useful fantasy football QB. Did it help that he was chucking the ball 100 times a game? Yeah, probably. But he saw 3 total snaps in the preseason. I think it's going to take some time for him to get back into NFL shape and just be not afraid to take a hit, because I don't expect this Bengals defense or Bengals offensive line to be all that good. They look at the Vikings defense now. On paper, you might think, the Vikings, they were terrible last year on defense. But this is a much revamped defense. I think they obviously got Patrick Peterson now, one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL still. And I just think they're going to be pretty good. I think Joe Burrow's going to be a little afraid. Obviously, Jamar Chase is still getting into NFL shape as well. I'm looking elsewhere at the QB position, especially in DFS format. Moving on, my second QB sit. I don't know why you'd be starting this guy, Andy Dalton. Now, I don't know why you're starting him in fantasy football leagues. Probably wouldn't even start him in a 3 QB league. Would I be surprised if he gets negative fantasy points this week? Probably not. Now, you look at it, matchup against the Rams, and that just ferocious defense. Absolutely not what Matt Nagy and the Bears wanted. Justin Fields is just looking at him saying, put me in, coach. And I wouldn't be surprised if Justin Fields finds his way into this game. And who knows, get Andy Dalton out of your lineups, get him out of your DFS lineups, unless you're trying to throw an absolute dart. I don't even know why you do that. Rather not even play a quarterback at that rate. I don't love Andy Dalton this week. Don't love him season long or DFS. Get him out of your lineups, even if you got him in there. We're moving on to some running backs. We're talking about start Gus Edwards. Now, keeping this one simple. You're playing the Raiders. Boom. All right, next one. Now, seriously. I mean, you got the Raiders. They don't scare me. The Ravens obviously have dealt with a plethora of injuries, and that's why I see Gus Edwards here. Obviously, they're down J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill. They brought in new guys like Trenton Cannon, who my New York Jets drafted. Le'Veon Bell, obviously there. Tyson Williams, still solid, but the Ravens like Gus Edwards. They paid him this offseason, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him with 100 yards and a touchdown on Monday Night Football against this Raiders defense. I'm all in on Gus Edwards, especially this week. I think we'll have a very good season long. I'm all in on the Gus Edwards train. Let's move. I'm all in on the Gus bust. Sorry, my bad. Moving on, another start, Raheem Mostert. Now, I know I get it. A lot of people like Trey Sermon, and I do too. I'm a Trey Sermon believer, got him in some fantasy football league, but this is still Raheem Mostert's job, and currently Trey Sermon is the backup. Now, I don't think, Raheem Mostert will have this job the whole year because Trey Sermon's very talented, but it's a great matchup against the Lions who, let's be honest, the Lions are not going to be that good this year. The 49ers should have no business handling them. And I think Mostert, you look at him, he looked good in the preseason again with the first team. He was handling all the carries. And I think he's going to be very good. Not only will the 49ers be able to dominate them on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, putting them in favorable position. I love Mostert. I don't love him season long, but week one, I'm all in on Mostert. I think he could have a good chance of getting over 100 yards, maybe breaking a big touchdown run. He's going to get off to a good start. Get him in your lineup. Moving on to some sits. Josh Jacobs and arguably Kenyon Drake if you got both of them. Now, I'm still unsure what to make of this Raiders backfield. Now, if you look at it, Josh Jacobs, he's a guy that needs a lot of touches. He's not necessarily the most efficient, and over his career so far, he's really been making his killing off of a bunch of touches. They're just feeding him, and eventually he's going to do something with the ball. Now, you look at it, the Ravens, tough defense, 12th toughest against the run last season. Jacobs doesn't provide a lot out of the backfield in terms of receiving the ball. If you're in PPR leagues, he's not necessarily the best receiver. That's why they brought in Kenyon Drake. If you have similar options, I'd be looking elsewhere instead of Josh Jacobs. Nothing personal. I just am not in on him, and that's why I'm moving elsewhere. Now, moving on to another one. We're going to go a whole position group. The all Buffalo Bills running backs. Yeah, that's Zach Moss. That's Devin Singletary. Why? Because the best running back on this team is their quarterback, Josh Allen. Now, if you're starting Zach Moss in fantasy football, I don't know what the heck's going on. I'm sorry. Him and Devin Singletary are about as touchdown dependent as tight ends 10 through 20 that you're looking at. Now, you look at both these guys, they're combining that with a bad matchup against this Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm out on all Bills running backs, not just this week, but the whole season. In DFS, I'm out of here. Look elsewhere for your fantasy football points. Moving on to some wide receivers. Robbie Anderson. Now, I'm starting him because he's him and Sam Darnold, revenge game against my New York Jets, and I know I'll be in attendance, and I know that they will get absolutely blasted, and I wouldn't be surprised if Darnold to Robbie Anderson, some sort of touchdown or big game, 100 yards and a touchdown. Robbie Anderson was super undervalued in fantasy football drafts. I think he's going to have a really good year, and he's just going to pick up off from what he did last year, and I think he might even get into the end zone, something he struggled to do last season. I think the Panthers will try to get him in the end zone. I mean, these people have feelings, and they want to go out there. Sam Darnold wants to put on a show against his former team, and I fully expect it to happen. That's exactly what it feels like to be a New York Jets fan, and so I'm in on Robbie Anderson this week in fantasy, as well as maybe in my DFS lineups. Another guy, Julio Jones, more likely than not, you're probably starting this guy. Let's be honest. You probably drafted in the top 20 wide receivers, but this is more of a, hey, this guy's really good. Why aren't you starting? Why are you nervous about him? Look at it. 2 reasons. The matchup's great. Arizona, terrible. Their defensive backs are all over the place. They don't have anyone that's really that good, playing a while, that looks good on paper. Obviously, like we already talked about, Patrick Peterson with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I don't think it's a very positive matchup. It will be one all season. I'm all in on Julio Jones to have a field day. Now, number 2, you look at it, the Ryan Tannehill, and I think the Titans are going to force feed Julio the ball. They want this matchup. All these haters, people saying, no, Julio Jones washed up. They want to show him, no, this guy's still one of the best receivers in the NFL. And that is why I'm in on Julio Jones this week in fantasy football. Moving on to some sits, I kind of already hinted at this one. Ja'Marr Chase. I'm going to be sitting him in my fantasy lineups. It should come as no surprise. Now, Ja'Marr Chase is here because I've already talked about him in all my preseason fantasy football videos, and this was before he was dropping the ball. This guy's been out of football for so long, and he's probably going to get tracked and just followed by Patrick Peterson. That's never a good sign. So I'm avoiding Ja'Marr Chase if I can. I don't mind Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins. I do like those guys. I think, Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase are still going to get into groove, into NFL fantasy form and all of this and that. I do think I'm going to be sitting Ja'Marr Chase in a lot of my lineups if I possibly can. I don't already have a lot of Ja'Marr Chase in fantasy football as is, but sit him in your lineups if you possibly can. Moving on to another wide receiver, I'm sitting Kenny Golladay. Kenny G shouldn't surprise you if you watch my preseason videos. I'm not touching Kenny G with a 10-foot pole, so no surprise here. Kenny Golladay already dealt with a bunch of injuries this preseason, and he might not even be fully healthy for this game. Combine that with a terrible matchup against the Denver Broncos, who've revamped their whole defense, which you'll hear about them in the defense. Spoiler alert. If you got the wrong guy, if you think I'm starting Kenny Golladay in fantasy football, absolutely not. Next, tight ends. I'm starting Mark Andrews. Now, I'm not, click off the video. Now, I don't blame you. Now, you're obviously starting Mark Andrews. You don't have much of a choice, but if you drafted him and maybe you're nervous or maybe you're just happy to have him, I just want to say this guy's going to have a very good fantasy football season. For starters, the Ravens, tons of injuries. They don't really have a lot of receivers left, obviously down a lot of running backs. Mark Andrews due for another year, and also another big year. And also, shout out to Mark Andrews, just signed a big extension. Ravens are going to use him. He's going to have a very good season, just like he has the past couple seasons in fantasy football. Get him into your lineups against the Raiders. Bet you he gets into the end zone this week. Moving on to another guy you should be starting, Logan Thomas. Now, he was drafted probably tight end 7 or 8, and I just want to say I have a lot of shares of Logan Thomas this season. I think he's going to be super good, and there's no reason that I don't think he can finish as a top 4 or 5 tight end in fantasy football. Last year, Logan Thomas ran more routes than any other tight end. Yes, Travis Kelce included. He had double-digit fantasy points in the last 9 of his 11 games. Now he gets a good fantasy QB, Ryan Fitzpatrick. The Chargers have a decent secondary, but I don't necessarily think they have the best linebackers to cover the tight end position. They obviously got to deal with Terry McLaurin. I think I'm going to be taking Logan Thomas. I'm taking him all day. Other deep sleeper tight ends that you might be looking at, maybe DFS-wise, Austin Hooper or Zach Ertz. Don't mind either of those guys. Moving on to some sits, which is more controversial. Robert Tonyan. Now, I mean, I could give you a list of tight ends that you could sit because a lot of these guys are very touchdown dependent. But I think Robert Tonyan is the leader of the touchdown dependent guys. You look at him last year, scored over 50% of his points on just touchdowns. Now, this guy's due for some regression in the touchdown department, and that's why I'm expecting him to regress a little bit. Obviously, versus the New Orleans Saints, a pretty good defense, one that's very good, and we don't know how high scoring. These people might expect this to be a high scoring game, but just because Jameis Winston's out there turning the ball over, but I don't think Jameis will be that bad. I think there'll be a very run-heavy approach from the New Orleans Saints, chewing the clock. Just don't think Robert Tonyan, you're basically banking on him to get a touchdown. I'm not in on him this year. And another guy I'm not in on, especially not only this week, but also full year, Eric Ebron. Now, if you were starting Eric Ebron in your fantasy league, I don't know what you're doing. Now, you should quickly replace him with Pat Freiermuth, which is exactly what the Pittsburgh Steelers have done. Look at Ebron. He struggled with drops last season, and he isn't the best run-blocking tight end. Pat Freiermuth, maybe you score a touchdown week 1. Get rid of Eric Ebron. The Steelers, I don't know, will end up with Eric Ebron on their final roster when it's all said and done. Maybe he's traded. He will not be in any of my DFS lineups and definitely not worth a spot on your fantasy football team. The last position we're going to talk about, the defense side, and I already hinted at it earlier. We're taking the Denver Broncos defense versus the Giants. They don't call them Danny turnovers for nothing. They're going to go up against Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. It's going to be a tough day at the office for Daniel Jones. I don't need to tell you to sit Daniel Jones as a QB, although you definitely shouldn't be starting him if you already were planning on it. Now, the secondary for the Denver Broncos obviously been upgraded through the draft, which they used their first-round pick on Pat Surtain II, I believe, and the free agency. They clearly got a dominant defensive line with Chubb and Von Miller. The Broncos should have their way against this bad Giants offense as a whole, a bad offensive line, and still not 100% Saquon Barkley or even Kenny Golladay, who are already trashed. I'm taking the Denver Broncos defense probably in all of my DFS lineups. I think they have a very good day. I'm in on them. Another defense, 49ers, which will be in my contention for my DFS lineups. 49ers, first in the Lions. Now, I don't have to tell you, I drafted the Lions or the 49ers defense just for looking forward to this matchup against Jared Goff. And I'm here anyways. The Lions obviously have TJ Hawkinson. That's about it. DeAndre Swift is banged up, and the rest of the receivers are not getting drafted in fantasy football for good reason. 49ers finally healthy after dealing with a ton of injuries last year. So I'm in on the 49ers defense this year. I think will be very good. And the 49ers are someone that I'm out there, if they're out on the waiver wire, maybe you got a team that I'm about to talk about starting as your defense. Get the 49ers, and you will not regret them. Get them in your DFS lineups. Moving on to 2 sits before we wrap up this video. The Browns defense versus the Chiefs. I don't need to go out on a limb here and tell you to bench the Browns defense. They probably aren't ranked on a lot of sites because they're versing Pat Mahomes. Yeah, no, I'm out. It's very hard to not only get sacks, but also get turnovers against Patrick Mahomes. He's already got an improved offensive line, so good luck, Myles Garrett, getting to the quarterback. Stay away from them at all costs if you can. They'll be useful down the stretch because I do think they have some favorable matchups later on in the year, but I'm out on them in week 1. Another defense to sit, the Bears defense versus the LA Rams. Now, I'm a believer in the Rams offense. Logan is not, so he can get out of here, but I'm a believer in this team, and I think Matthew Stafford would lead them on very long and scoring drives. And I also think the Bears offense is going to put their defense in a lot of bad spots, whether that's some turnovers to Andy Dalton, whatever, you name it. I do think they'll have some positive spots for the Rams to score points. That's nothing you can do as a Bear defensive owner. Now, the Bears defense, they have a good fantasy defense. They'll be useful down the road, just like the Browns defense. But week 1, Sunday Night Football against, one of the better offenses, I think, in the NFL. I'm not going to be starting the Bears defense if I can. Now, those are my starts and sits for week 1 of the NFL season. Like I said, this video will normally be coming live on Tuesdays, so you can get your lineups prepared for the whole week of fantasy football. Have any fantasy football comments or questions? Leave them down below in the comment section below. I'll answer them as they come through. I appreciate you guys for showing your support. Follow us on Twitter. Join our Discord. It will be all linked down below. We appreciate your guys' love and support. Can't do it without you guys. Almost 8,000 subscribers. You guys are the absolute best. This has been Austin. I'll catch you guys again in the next one. We got more videos coming each and every day, so go check out those videos. I'll I'll link some of them on the screen. It's been Austin. I'll catch you guys again. Peace out.